Well, we've been looking forward to being with you, and it's really fun to see all of you, young couples, and all the children, and that lovely noise of all the kids. That's a beautiful thing. I had a memory a while ago, a little bit. You probably know all this about us, but just in case, we met. She's from Texas. I grew up in Oklahoma, but we met in Oregon, and we're campus ministers doing college ministry, and then I became a pastor in Monmouth, and then I pastored. We were in Monmouth about 11 years total, and then I was pastored in Gresham on the east side of Portland for 23 years till we came here. But when we were in Monmouth, the church was brought back memories to what our church was like. Lots of young couples and lots of kids being born like every month. And the Lord was at work, and it was a great time. And I remember us visiting another church that was filled with senior adults. And this lady was saying, "Tell us about your church." And Beverly was saying, kind of explaining this kind of thing. And the lady goes, "Oh, that reminds me of our church about 40 years ago." And I went, "Oh, my goodness. Lord, may it never be that's the story of how it was 40 years ago. And that, Lord, let it continue to be like this." And so this is a wonderful, you're part of a very special time. And we really are happy to be with you. Is anyone in here 37 years old?
Or older.
Just shy of 37? Okay, well, we've been married 37 and a half, so we have been married longer than everybody in here. So we got married on, what was the date? I don't remember.
You better come up with it.
December 19th, 1987. And it was a Saturday night. It was December night, and heard the church she grew up in Dallas, Texas. And some of you know this story, but we were amazed at the number of friends that made the trip to Texas. And it's time for the wedding, and pastor's up there, and I'm standing there, and the groomsmen and the bridesmaids are in place. And it's time for her to be escorted down, by her father. And we're waiting for those double doors to open in the back. And eventually they do, and Beverly comes down, and if you know Beverly, she came down the aisle going, "Hi, oh hi, oh hi." And that's just who she is. What I didn't know is that right before those doors opened, Beverly's dad says to her, "I'll give you $5,000 if you go get a cheeseburger with me right now, no questions asked." And thankfully,
He was serious.
and he meant it. First of all, he knew how much money I made or didn't make. And he meant it. But thankfully, she said no. And we were talking about it a while back, and she said, "I've been thinking about that. And there has never been a full 24-hour period that I've regretted that decision." Now think about that. The reason I said 23, there could be a lot of 23-hour periods, a lot of 23. But she said she started to say, "There's never been a day I regretted it," but that isn't actually true. There's some time in there that she has because, because marriage is hard. And there are no exceptions to that. And it's the most beautiful, wonderful thing that you can be a part of, but it's at the very same time. Just like I think maybe all of the most significant parts of our life that are the most wonderful, they're also maybe many times the hardest. And so that's true about marriage. When I first, little bit before we moved, about 6 years ago this time, we moved to be a part of Resonate. And a little bit before that, I was meeting with some of the Resonate pastors and wives, and one of them at that time said, "So you've been married 3 decades," which now we're closer to 4, but it just sounds awful when you say that. But they said, what's been the hardest decade for you? And I answered very quickly, it was the first one. It was the first decade. The first 10 years, you're learning so much about how to do life together. So many things you have to do for the first time, or you do them Most things we do for the first time, we don't do them well, so we're learning. And I wouldn't say we haven't had challenges in the next 2.5 decades, but that first one was definitely the hardest. And I'm guessing that's where probably everybody is. And so we have that in mind as we're talking tonight, as we talk about marriage. But what we do want to say is that marriage involves a struggle. But sometimes we equate struggle to failure, and they're not the same. And we want you to hear that from the beginning. If you're having some struggles, it doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're married. And it happens without exception. So.
Yeah, I think sometimes we think maybe the person we married duped us, that they misrepresented themselves, or maybe we picked the wrong person, or maybe, we made a mistake. But we just want to normalize the struggle. And what I say is that your spouse, until you have a difficult child, your spouse is going to be the sanctifying agent of your life. The Lord will use your spouse to unearth selfishness in you and wrong thinking. He calls it spiritual sandpaper. You rub up against each other and knock off the rough bits. I'm having a
Your
little bit of
computer's
trouble.
not working.
It's being funny. It wants me to do things. Don't panic over there. I hear you over there. Okay, so anyway, there you go. Anyway, and mostly we bring into marriage wounds and things because you married a human. You didn't marry Jesus. You married a human. So your spouse is going to come with these, in addition to their wonderful qualities, they're going to come with very annoying flaws, and you are going to bring with you a set of expectations that are so embedded in you, you don't even know they exist. And so we certainly had those kind of struggles in our lives, in our married life. But what we have learned in our 37-year marathon is that the Bible gives us some really, really practical advice on how to live a life of love for the Lord and for the people that the Lord loves, which starts with your spouse. So, there's, Alex, on the slide, there's 1 Corinthians 13. Does someone have a lot of fun reading dramatically? Brian Jones, are you fun? Are you fun at reading?
I can see the words.
Okay.
I can probably read them too.
Okay, read with the drama.
With the drama. If I speak in the tongues of men and angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all the mysteries and all the knowledge, and I have all the faith so as to remove mountains, but I have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist in its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love
You didn't know
never...
it was going to be that much.
Hey, if you're tired, you may
No,
choose someone
I'm
else.
loving this.
If you want to play the game, you can choose someone else, or you can keep going.
No, I'm going back to
Keep
eighth
going,
grade.
man.
I'm going to finish this.
You're doing,
Okay.
doing great.
Go.
Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up my childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. So now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love.
All right, can we just acknowledge? Okay, beautiful work. There might be a job in at Audible for reading books or what. Maybe you could read the Bible on Audible, who knows. Okay, so there was one verse that always seemed to not fit with me in this beautiful, don't you want to love that way? Don't you want to be loved that way? Who could argue with how beautiful that is, right? But my 20s and 30s, when I was younger, let's just put it that way, there was one verse that really kind of stuck out to me as kind of jarring, like I didn't get really how it related. And it was verse 11 that says, when I was a child, I spoke like a child. And, I became a man and I put away childish things. And I didn't really make the leap with Paul that he was making there, which is a little bit sad because it turns out that verse is kind of the key, not kind of, it holds the key to keeping your spouse being your friend and your lover. And Keith is going to explain that right now.
I thought the part of the passage that you had a hard time with was when it said, I became a man. I thought that's right. Oh, no.
That's a different different conference.
When I was a child, I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. What we want to talk about in this, he's talking about we have certain questions that guide our lives when we are immature, when we're children. But when we mature, and we would say, add to that, when we are married, we have to move from childhood to adulthood. And as a single person, we can live and ask the question that younger and immature people ask, and that is the question of what pleases me. A single person can live by that question if they want to. What pleases me? What do I want to do? What should I put in my freezer? What's my bedtime? Who do I invite into my life? Who do I marry? Who do I date? What's the ratio, my preferred ratio between video gaming and household maintenance? There's lots of decisions, right? We even choose our spouse largely based on what pleases us. That's not all bad, but of course, right? Maybe it's character, usually it's looks to some degree, and something about that person makes you want to spend their life with you. They please you. But then it says, when I became a man, I gave up childish ways. And so kind of a foundation of what we want to talk about tonight is that when we get married, if we're going to stay friends, we're going to have to change that question. And maybe this seems obvious, but the question changes from what pleases me to what is best for us. That's the guiding question when we get married. And that question never changes. For the rest of your life, for the rest of your married life, that question becomes the guiding question. Not what do I want, but what's best for us. 1,000 times over, we have to ask that question.
It goes from how much foreplay before sex to how high the trash piles up before you take it out. And for some of you guys, if you haven't figured this out yet, there is a correlation. And if you want to know about that, you can ask Keith later, okay? It's a shock because the night before you got married, you were gazing into each other's eyes and saying cute little things like, tomorrow will be Mr. and Mrs. and all. And your lives were so synced and you were so in tune. I feel a little silly saying this to all of you with a baby already because this is so long ago to y'all. That was an eternity ago, right? But then the next day, something happened and somebody squeezed the new toothpaste tube in the middle. Or they had the audacity to hang the toilet paper with the roll going under instead of over. Or maybe they left the seat up or down. Or maybe their razor hair was all over the bathtub or the sink.
This is getting a little too specific.
I didn't even mention the toothpaste spit, the unsmashed toothpaste that comes out. Okay, and all of that was just in the bathroom, right? The smallest room in your house. So multiply that by, say, the world that you live in. And you can understand why we struggle in marriage. Okay, I think we've made our case. Yeah. Okay, so we've learned 3 principles that we've kind of dedicated our lives to. And we want to share these. And some of you have been with us, so you could probably stand up and say these yourself. But we've devoted our lives to these, even before we had them written down in alliteration. And because of that, we're happier now. We can confidently say we're better now than we were when we had little ones running around. And the three things are these. Number one, be a student of your spouse. The second is be a servant of your spouse. And the third is be a spiritual advocate for your spouse.
Okay. Let's spend a little time on each of these three. That's what we're going to look at tonight. We're going to spend the most time on the first one, and then we'll spend a little bit less on the next two, but we'll have times tonight and in the morning for Q&A related to this. Become a student of your spouse. Let's look at Ephesians 4:30 through 32.
Anyone else want to try to best Brian on his reading?
Somebody want to read on this side of the room?
Yeah, Kristen, I see you. Go ahead.
I was avoiding eye contact, isn't it?
Didn't work.
Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as in Christ God forgave you.
So, first, we might say, what does that have to do with being a student of your spouse? Except that this is one of those passages where it's not a marriage verse, first of all. But anytime the Bible talks to us about how to treat other people, we can apply that to marriage as well. And so there's so many bad habits that we can develop and that leads to bitterness and rage and anger. And we have to learn what makes our spouse tick. We have to learn what makes them angry. We have to learn what motivates them. You and I, as spouses, should become the foremost living expert of our spouse so that we can live this kind of life, so that we can live this way with each other.
Well, if you've talked to us about marriage any time, you've heard us probably say, we know each other better now than we knew ourselves in 1987 or 1997. We've determined to understand that there's a difference between what makes them tick and what is wrong with you. You see the difference in attitude? But learning about one another helps us relate to one another better. The first piece of advice on that is just to travel the minefield of expectations with grace. And all of us come into marriage with expectation, and we go into marriage, and like I said, okay, I already talked about gravity, right? How it's like you don't, it's so, this is how it is, that you don't think about it. You know, you just act on it. And then comes the day when one of those expectations is not met. And it feels like you have been completely betrayed. It feels like the salmon is eating the bear instead of the bear eating the salmon. Do you know what I mean? And we're shocked. And in my early marriage, I came with a lot of expectations. And the way I responded to Keith every single time was as if he had committed the worst series of felonies that ever existed.
If I didn't meet that.
If you didn't meet it, right? So here's an example. My family has a value that I didn't know wasn't normal, and it was called, my kids call it the ministry of celebration. So if there was a thing to celebrate, we celebrated. If it was a holiday, there were cakes. St. Patrick's Day, Bastille Day, I don't know, just whatever it was. There were cakes, there were gifts, there were decorations. And so when our first Easter together happened 4 months after we were married, and we were in a little church plant, and he led the music and I played the piano, and these, you know, and on the biggies, if we did that for George Washington's birthday, which had cherry pies and stuff like that, you can imagine on the big holidays we go all out, right? And so it's our first Easter, and we've been married about 4 months, and we're busy, seminary, student work, job, church plant, all the things. And after church on our first Easter, Keith says, I'll get us lunch. And that's how we ended up eating grocery store fried chicken while watching the NBA playoffs while sitting on our couch. There were no flowers, there were no presents, and let me just say that grocery store deli chicken technology has come a long way since 1987. Okay, it was not good, okay? So for the life of him, Keith could not understand why I was sitting on the couch sobbing over my chicken leg, right? He couldn't understand it. And for the life of me, I could not understand how Keith could possibly think this was an acceptable way to celebrate the resurrection of our Lord, you know? And we just sat there. And this is just one example, right? That was one example of an unmet expectation. And that Keith got in trouble for not meeting. And our whole life was this minefield of my expectations that we would discover when Keith stepped on the landmine and it blew up. And it was a hard time. And it was hard for me because I just kept facing disappointment after disappointment after disappointment. And it was hard for Keith because every time I got disappointed, I would react poorly. And as they piled up, I acted even more poorly. And so over time we grew and we learned to we learned about one another. And so what that did is that Keith quit thinking, he came to see that I was not a raving lunatic. He began to understand that. And I came to understand that he was not a heartless deadbeat. You know, there's more to him than that. But what I learned, and this is really important, and I want to get this right, so sorry, I'm going to have to back up just a little bit. Keith learned in all of that celebration is important to me. It's important to celebrate. It just is. Is that weird? To him it is, except he knows me. And so he celebrates for me. And I learned that if I had an expectation that I was passionate about, I needed to be able to communicate that in a non-childish way. When I was disappointed, I needed to learn to say, hey, in the future, this meant a lot to me, and I'm disappointed. In a non-childish way, which meant I didn't assassinate his character by saying, you don't care about anything. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Okay.
So another truth we would say is choose to be kind to one another. When people ask us a question,
What's the secret?
Yeah, they'll say, what's the secret to marriage? What's the secret to a happy marriage for however many years? We would say, probably there's not one secret, right? But if I had to give one answer, it would say, choose to be kind to each other. It's always a choice. And it seems like with the people closest to us, it's too often we don't do that. So it's a choice. We also would say, choose to be best friends. But with that, the kindness comes along. And part of that is a choice to put away childish things, to put away childish expectations. How do I say
One
that?
childish expectation that a lot of women come into marriage with is, he should just know how I feel. Okay, we need to put that away. He doesn't know unless you tell him. And he'll hear it better if you do that with kindness.
And so part of that is kind of working through, it says work through hurtful habits, or work through patterns that are not helpful. Like part of the pattern we had for a while is I would blow it every time there was something to celebrate. But part of it was I didn't know how. And so finally on one Mother's Day, she said, it's the day before, she gave me a list of what I could give her for Mother's Day. Now, that might feel like a failure on the one hand. I was so thankful. It helped me so much. And there were like 10 things on there. And she said, you can choose any of these and it will make me happy. What a great thing. And I carried that thing in my wallet for at least 10 years. It was so helpful. And so that helped us change a pattern. And that was kind of her to do that for me. And rather than just keep expecting I would figure it out, because I was not figuring it out. And our family was the opposite of hers. We kind of played down everything. And birthdays, nah, no big deal, you know, whatever it was. So that really helped us. So,
We set each other up for success. We're learning that that's helpful. So maybe it might be helpful for you. Okay, so we learned about each other. It's not Keith is selfish and mean, and it's not out of the blue, Beverly will just emotionally vomit all over me. Instead of those two things, it became not, what in the world is wrong with you? And instead it became, how do I put away childish things and do what's best for us? I learned, for example, my hurtful habit in marriage was mean words and sarcasm and speaking to belittle, and a determined to make him as unhappy as I felt he made me. These are terrible things, and I hope you'll forgive me because I've grown. But these are things. Keith's hurtful habits were only expending energy on things that he liked. So he had to learn to make effort in places that were important to me. And I had to learn some things too. We adjust our expectations and we ask that question, what's best for our relationship?
let me put a story in here. You sometimes tell this story of how we discovered that, about the hurtful words.
Oh.
So I don't know what it was about. I don't remember. I just remember she said something that hurt me. And I didn't plan to do this. It was just a moment. And I said, when you say things like that, how do you want me to feel? And I said, because if you're wanting me to feel bad, it's working. And what went on in your mind?
So he paused. He actually waited for an answer after, how do you want me to feel? And this was a Kairos moment in my life. Because how did I want him to feel? Well, I wanted him to feel stupid and bad and mean. I mean, embarrassed and ashamed and determined never to displease me again.
But you didn't fully realize it.
But I didn't realize it until that moment because it was so ingrained in me from my upbringing that the way we respond is to eviscerate the other person so that they will never displease you again. And so at that moment, now am I going to answer, I want you to feel stupid and mean? Well, no, because that's terrible. You know, that's not how the game works. He messed up the game. And at that moment, the Lord intervened in my life and said, you cannot continue to treat your husband this way. You're ruining yourself. And I don't remember what it was about, but I remember where he was and where I was. And the Lord met me at that day. And the rest of my life has been an active work of sanctification, of the Lord removing that habit of responding that way. Do I still have the tendency? Oh, yeah. And what's hilarious is that he sees it, and he can see the fight on my face. So sometimes I get in trouble for it, even though I keep it in, and I don't think that's fair.
Well, actually, I would say, let's say that was 10 years into our marriage. I don't remember how far it was. But let's say 20 years later, she is so much different than that. Mm-hmm. Dramatically different than that. It is an incredible act of love to see how she's changed, because it's been a choice 1,000 times over on her part. And so I want to say that to say, you can change. And it will come.
The Lord can change.
And the Lord, yeah, absolutely. So let's say that. The final part of this first one is to, as we learn to really get to know each other, is develop a language for effective communication. You kind of develop some things within your own relationship that maybe sometimes only you know what that means, but go ahead.
Okay. How many of you have ever heard our aunt story? Oh, yay. Okay.
A few of you
For the
have.
rest of you, you can be in the club too. Okay, so I hate sugar ants. You know, the little ones that crawl in your house in February. I hate them. I hurt them. And in our first house, every February in Monmouth, they would come crawling into our kitchen, and I hate them. And we'd have to spray. And so when I was pregnant with our first baby, she was born February 22nd. So I'm 9 months pregnant, right? And I go in the kitchen, and there crawling on my counter are 2 sugar ants. So I go into the other room where he is and I say, I killed 2 ants today. And he went, oh, okay. So the next day comes and now there's 4 ants. And I kill them and I say, Keith, I killed 4 ants today. And he's like, And so this goes on for a couple more days until that day. And you know what happens when I go in the kitchen? There's the whole colony of ants marching in a line in my kitchen. And because this was early in my sanctification process, I march into where this poor man was just trying to eat his sandwich. And I say, obviously you don't care about me or our unborn child because you won't spray for the ants. So I guess I'll have to spray for the ants and blah, blah, blah. You know, I just all over him. And he took it and then he looked at me kind of blinking and said, when did you tell me to spray for the ants? And what did you think I meant when I told you the ant death report? And he's like, well, I just thought you were talking to me. Okay. So it turns out that my request for him to spray the ants did not land. And that got him into some
So part of it is, ladies, be direct. Be clearer than you think you might need to be for most of us.
Yeah.
'Cause she was hinting. I was not getting it.
I thought I was clear. But we don't have to get in a fight about it. But it's not the last time we've miscommunicated, right? But now we have some language. So when we had a GPS issue last summer, and after it was over, I said, hey, was this one of those ants in the kitchen things? And he said, yeah, it was. So we didn't have to go through all the drama because, ants in the kitchen. We just didn't, our communication went. So you see what I mean? Develop the language.
Some of it might have to do with the issue of one person in the relationship, because she was like, why didn't you turn back there when I said you should turn? I was like, when did you say I should turn? Maybe it's me. Okay.
Anyway, okay. So here's the thing. The language of sarcasm and belittling is detrimental to your marriage. I don't care if you're the wife or the husband. If this is your go-to play, you are harming your marriage. Okay? Keith, oh, look, there it is. So from the time of the Kairos moment, how do you want me to feel? Okay, let's fast forward to 2019. And we're in a house with a small refrigerator. So we enjoy a refreshing Squirt Zero in the evening. Caffeine-free, grapefruit, lovely. And so I would put a couple of cans of Squirt Zero in the fridge, and then I would go about my business. And Keith would be thirsty, and he would go in the fridge. Oh, there's a can of Squirt Zero. I think I'll have one. But he wouldn't put a warm one back in. So the next day when I go to get my Squirt Zero, guess what's not in the refrigerator? There's no Squirt Zero. Now, a cold can of Squirt Zero is refreshing. A warm can is depressing, and it's not lovely, okay? Now, if this had happened early in our marriage, pre-Kairos, what would have happened is I would have popped into where he was watching golf or doing a thing, whatever, and I would have said, do you believe in fairies? Do you think fairies are real? Do you think Santa comes down the chimney every day to put Squirt Zeros in our refrigerator? Is that what you think happens? And I would have gone from there, right? And he would be going, okay. But I have learned that when a man is busy, when I'm attacking him, he's so busy defending himself that he completely misses the issue. So I'm learning to talk a new way. So instead, I walked in there and say, hey, I'd like to invite you into my process. Isn't that so much better?
Isn't that a great phrase? It was
And
very
I
helpful.
explained the one in, one out thing, and he was like, oh yeah, I'll do that too. And I did really good because I didn't in any way in my tone of voice imply, you idiot. And that was good.
It was really good.
And I didn't think of him as an idiot. I used to. But I don't anymore. Not really. I mean, there were times. Y'all know what I'm talking about. You're married, okay?
So, final thought here, and we're kind of dealing with some conflict in the midst of getting to know one another, but a wise couple said to us one time, never use the words just or only. Well, I was just doing this, or I only did that, because it diminishes something that's important to the other person. You're saying what's important to them is just or only. Don't say that. I think the person that said that to us was Bob Flegel.
John Mills.
Oh, it was John. Wow. Bob Flegel's the one that said, we've been happily married for 35 years. We've been married for 40, but we've been happily married for 35 years. And so.
Listen, if you're making everything a big deal, then nothing's a big deal. And you're making it impossible for your spouse to grow in his love for you and in his relationship. You are being destructive in your marriage. At the same time, if you dismiss every concern because they're just emotional or they're this, you're destroying your marriage. You don't want to be destructive. You want to build one another up, right?
So we've talked a lot about, I think, how we experience conflict in the early years under the heading of being a student of your spouse. But I think we never stop doing this, but in these first decade, that's exactly what you're learning. You're really learning, and many times through conflict, what the other person's like. So keep learning, keep watching, keep adjusting. Mm-hmm. So we won't spend quite as much time on the next two, like I said, but let's look at the second one. We want to be a student of our spouse and then become a servant of your spouse. We're going to look at another verse from Philippians, from Apostle Paul again. It says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit, rather in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your interests, but each of you to the interests of others. Again, not a marriage verse, but a verse for us for how we're to live as followers of Jesus, and we certainly apply them to one another. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit, rather in humility, value others above yourselves. One way that we like to interpret that is to assume that the other person is the most important person in the relationship. Assume the other person is the most important person in the relationship. In humility, value others above yourselves. Now, Paul's not saying that one person is more valuable than the other. We're both made in the image of God. Mm-hmm. But we treat the other person as if they are more important than I am. Because everything in us is, I'm most important, really. What do I want? That's our sin nature. But it's the choice of assuming. I mean, it can become, if we're intentional, maybe not every time, but more and more often, we can assume, get used to assuming that she is the most important person in the relationship, and she would do the same to me.
We've done this in a lot of ways. I'm going to give you some really simple examples. Ministry of Celebration, we'll stay on that thing. I love Christmas lights. So my husband, in our house in Pullman, our backyard, and our front yard has big trees. And now Keith goes out there and wraps the lights in Christmas trees. And it's beautiful. But he's not doing it because he loves Christmas lights. He could care less. But it's a gift that he gives to me. Another practical gift that he gave to me is we were very poor. Very poor. Can you believe me when I say that? Keith loves golf. He loves golf a lot. But in the days that we were first married and had small children, he golfed maybe twice a year, maybe 3 times a year.
4 or 5.
Because first of all, he had really bad clubs, okay? But second of all, we couldn't afford it. And he took the time that a lot of guys would have spent doing that, and he gave it to our family and to me. And I'm not saying you're a bad guy if you golf or hunt or whatever you do, but he made a choice to give that up. Now I'm like, go golf more. In fact, I've learned to enjoy golf. I watch golf on television because I've learned about it. But I do that not because I love it, but he loves it, right? Also, I just don't love cooking dinner.
That's true.
I absolutely loathe deciding what to cook for dinner. but I do it as a way of worship. I do laundry as a way of worship and as a way to serve my husband. So those are some things, okay?
So those choices we make over and over. When we got married, our wedding vows said nothing about what we were going to receive, right? They're all about what we were going to give. And it's about how we're going to serve one another. So be a servant of your spouse. So now let's look at the third one. Be a spiritual advocate for your spouse. And the first thing we would say there is determine a healthy habit of mutual faith. What we're saying is your patterns may not look like the other people at your table. You've got to find the patterns that work for you as a couple. You got church, you got village attendance, you got prayer time, maybe you talk about your day, you've got Bible reading. Some couples do all of those things on a very consistent basis. Others, and we, have struggled with that. And so we've had to find at different seasons and different times, different rhythms that work for us. And you're going to find with us, we rarely will say there's just one right way to do anything. We're all different. We have different personalities, different seasons, and so you need to find what works best for you. We certainly learn from one another, but you've got to find what works best for you.
You know, I came in with real rigid expectations. I had dreams of reading the Bible together, hand in hand in the morning. And then at night, we would pray over each other before we went to bed and, all that good stuff. And the reality is that has never been what we have done. And because Keith didn't come in with any expectations at all. But I carried a lot of bitterness in that. In fact, in our relationship, we never even sat together in church after we'd been married about 9 months. Because I played the piano during worship, and then he would get up to preach. So we never even sat together. And so I carried a lot of bitterness about that because we weren't reading about. Now, with our kids, we did stuff with our kids together at breakfast, and he would do a devotional. And we'll talk about that tomorrow. Most of our major decisions in life, Keith has led us to say, let's pray and fast for this amount of time and come back together. So we've done those things separately and together. But all that time, though, Keith was faithfully praying for me, bringing our family before the throne of God. But I didn't know he was doing it. Why? Because he never told me he was. And so I was really mad at him, feeling like I was shut out from his spiritual life, not understanding that he was leading us. He just wasn't leading us in the way that I had it in my mind. Does that make sense? So we've learned, we've evaluated, we've reevaluated. And so now he communicates with me so much more. And I share with him without waiting for him in bitterness to go first. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we're spontaneous.
The things you already know. Pray for your spouse and with your spouse. What we're finding for us works best is just spontaneous. When we talk about a need, we just pray right there. And that's allowed us, we pray a whole lot more together than when we were trying to do it at a regular time. And we had some challenges with that, health challenges at times, a lot of things in the way of that. But I do have some regrets about those early years and not doing that better. So you're still in that time. You can make those adjustments. Something else we can do is just pointing one another to Jesus, to the Lord. Asking the questions, where do you see the Lord moving in your life these days? Our son and daughter-in-law, they will have a Sabbath day. They'll take Thursday night through Friday night. And one of the questions they ask on Thursday night is, where have you seen the Lord at work this week? And it's become a pattern. But in the midst of decisions or in the midst of discouragement, sometimes that's also a good question to ask. Okay, where have we seen the Lord be faithful in the past? Okay, we can trust him to be faithful again. Where have we seen him at work in the midst of this situation? And then, of course, maintain the spiritual disciplines in your own life. In our journey, that was the strength of us. Our struggle was more doing it together. And then you can respond to this in a little bit if you want to. We've heard over the last few years living here just a kind of a note about the importance of holding each other accountable in marriage, and there is a place for that. But I've heard a lot of the wives talking about how do you say it?
Calling out.
Yeah, just calling out sin in each other's lives. And maybe you found a good way that works. I would actually caution on that a little bit. That could very easily become ignoring the speck in your eye or ignoring the board in my eye and looking at the speck at yours. And so maybe we can discuss that, and you found a way that works. But some of the examples that we've heard, we want to be a little more cautious about that. I don't know where that came from, but so anyway, that's kind of where we want to end. We just want to say these three principles are still a part of our lives. Be a student, be a servant, and a spiritual advocate of one another.